Clara Walker pressed her dead child's ribbon into her palm so hard the edge cut skin. And still she did not cry. Not on the coach, not in the dust, not when the man at the gate of the Double M Ranch looked her up and down like she was something the storm dragged in. She needed this job. She needed to keep moving before grief swallowed her whole. She didn't come to Redwood Valley to feel anything again. But the heart doesn't ask permission. If this story already has your attention, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 came to Redwood Valley like a punishment. The heat pressed down on everything, on the cracked soil of the road, on the horses, on the people. And nobody complained because complaining cost energy, and energy was something nobody in a farming town could afford to waste. The sun had been merciless since May. By July, the creek was half what it used to be, and tempers were running shorter than the water. It was on a Thursday morning, thick and airless, that the coach from Harlan stopped at the edge of town and let off 3 passengers. A traveling merchant with a case of tobacco, a young man heading west with stars in his eyes and no plan to speak of, and Clara Walker. She was 29 years old. She looked older, not because her face was worn. Her face was still soft, still fine-boned, still the kind of face people glanced at twice. She looked older because of the way she carried herself, like a woman who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to a person and wasn't sure yet whether surviving had been worth it. She wore a dark dress, too heavy for the heat, with a small mended tear at the left cuff. She carried a single bag. Inside it, 2 changes of clothing, a hairbrush, a small Bible she hadn't opened in 14 months, and a length of faded blue ribbon that had once been tied in a little girl's hair. Her daughter's name had been May. She had lived 8 months and 11 days, and she had died on a cold March morning while Clara held her. The doctor said it was fever. Clara knew it was something she would never fully understand and would never stop blaming herself for, no matter how many times people told her she couldn't have done a thing differently. Her husband, Thomas, had blamed her too. Not with words. Thomas wasn't much for words. He blamed her with silence, then with distance, then with the back of his hand one night in January, and then with his absence when she woke up one February morning and found his side of the bed cold and his horse gone from the stable. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. She had lasted 3 months in that house alone before she sold what little was left and climbed onto the first coach heading anywhere else. Redwood Valley was not anywhere in particular, but it was somewhere, and somewhere was enough. She had heard about the job from a woman at the way station in Harlan. A rancher, the woman said, name of Matthews. Lost his wife the previous winter. Had twin boys, 4 years old. Place was a mess. He was paying decent wages for someone willing to work hard and not ask questions. Clara wasn't in the business of asking questions anymore. Questions led to answers, and answers led to feelings she couldn't afford. She squared her shoulders and walked up the main street of Redwood Valley with her bag in her hand and her eyes straight ahead. People noticed her. People in small towns always notice strangers. She felt the looks, from the women outside the dry goods store, from the man rocking on the porch of the barber shop, from the cluster of older ladies near the church steps who went quiet when she passed, and then resumed murmuring the moment she'd gone by. She didn't stop. She kept walking until she found the livery stable, asked for directions to the Double M Ranch, and was told it was 4 miles east. The man at the livery, a heavy-set fellow with kind eyes named Bert, looked her over and said, "You the one going out to work for Matthews?" "I am," Clara said. "You heard about the place?" "I heard he needs help." Bert scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, he does." He paused, like he was deciding whether to say more. Then, He ain't easy to work for, ma'am, just so you know. Man's got a short fuse and a long memory. Lost his wife in December. Twins were barely 3. He ain't recovered from it. Probably won't be easy to get along with. Clara looked at him evenly. I've worked for difficult people before. I imagine you have, Bert nodded slowly. I'll hitch you a ride. Old Clem's heading out that way shortly. Won't charge you nothing. She thanked him. She sat on the bench outside and waited, her bag between her feet, the ribbon pressed between her fingers inside her skirt pocket, where no one could see. She was not afraid of difficult men. She was, if she was honest with herself, which she rarely was anymore, afraid of nothing so much as stillness, afraid of what rose up inside her when there was no task to focus on, no road to follow, nothing to occupy her hands. Because when everything went quiet, May was there. May and the weight of her. May and the silence that had replaced her. Clara pressed the ribbon harder. Clem was an old man who smelled of tobacco and spoke approximately 4 sentences during the entire 4-mile ride, all of them about the drought. Clara offered brief, polite responses and spent the rest of the time watching the land roll by, flat and golden and relentless, the way the West always was, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. When the ranch came into view, her first thought was that it had been a fine place once. The house was big, 2 stories, solidly built. The barn was large and well-positioned. There were 2 outbuildings, a good-sized stable, fenced paddocks stretching east. You could see it had been designed by someone with care and intention. But the care had lapsed. The front porch railing was sagging on one end. The yard was cluttered. The garden that likely had been someone's pride was overgrown and half dead. The whole property had the particular look of a place that had given up. Clem slowed the wagon near the gate, and she climbed down. "Good luck to you," he said, and meant it. She walked to the front door and knocked. Silence for a long moment, then boots on hardwood, heavy and deliberate, and the door opened. Jack Matthews was tall, not in a way that was meant to impress anyone, in the way of a man who'd grown up working and had simply become solid from it. He had dark hair, badly in need of cutting, and dark eyes that looked at her the way you'd look at the horizon when you were trying to judge a storm. Calculating, careful, not unkind, but nowhere close to warm. He looked at her. She looked back. "Mrs. Walker?" he said. "Yes, sir." "You're smaller than I expected." "I work bigger than I look." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, something near it. He stepped back from the door. "Come in, then." The inside of the house was better than the outside, but not by much. There were dishes on the table from what appeared to be breakfast, and possibly also the previous night's supper. Laundry in a basket that had clearly been sitting there for days. A pair of small boots near the door, caked with mud. The floor was swept, at least. Someone was trying. "I had a woman coming in twice a week," Jack said, moving toward the kitchen. "She quit in May. Said the boys were too much." "How old?" 4. Twins. Boys." He turned and looked at her. "They're a handful. I won't pretend otherwise." "Where are they now?" "Out back. I told them to stay out of trouble until I sorted this out." His jaw tightened briefly. "They don't always listen." "They're 4, Clara said. 4-year-olds don't generally specialize in listening." He stared at her for a moment. Then, "No, they don't." He folded his arms across his chest. "What I need is someone who can manage the house. Meals, cleaning, laundry. Help me keep the boys from killing themselves, or each other. I've got 2 ranch hands, but they're working the land, not the house. I can't do both." "I understand." "Room and board's included. Meals. Pays $12 a month to start. You do the work, it goes up. Clara nodded. That's fair. I need to know you're going to stay, he said, and for the first time, something shifted
This
beneath the
story
flat
was
surface of
posted
his
on the
voice.
channel west of Betrayal.
The boys have had
Please
3
do not
women come
repost
through here
it
since
in any
December.
form.
Every one of them left. I need to know you're not going to walk out on them. She held his gaze. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Matthews. You say that now. I say it because I mean it. Her voice was quiet but steady. I don't have anywhere else to be. This job suits me. I'll do the work, and I'll stay as long as you need me. He studied her for another long moment. Then he nodded, once, sharply, the way a man nods when he's decided something he isn't entirely sure about. All right, I'll show you the room. The room was small, barely larger than a closet, with a single window that faced the yard. A narrow bed, a washstand, a hook on the wall. Clara set her bag down on the bed and looked around. It was more than she'd had in February. It ain't much, Jack said from the doorway, his voice tight with something that might have been embarrassment. It's enough, she said. Thank you. He lingered a moment longer, then pushed off the doorframe. Boys'll be wanting lunch soon. Kitchen's yours to sort out. He left. She heard his boots on the floor, then the back door, then nothing. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs. She breathed. She did not reach for the ribbon. She stood up and went to the kitchen. The twins found her 20 minutes later. She heard them before she saw them. 2 sets of running footsteps, a crash, a yell, and then the back door flying open. They came in like a small cyclone, both of them breathless and sun-flushed, identical in every visible way. Dark-haired, dark-eyed, scrapes on their knees, dirt on their faces, and that particular look of barely contained chaos that belonged only to 4-year-old boys who had been running in the heat. They stopped dead when they saw her. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of beans she'd found in the pantry. She didn't look up immediately. She let them stand there for a moment. Then she looked over her shoulder and said, "You hungry?" The one on the left, slightly bolder, chin out, said, "Who are you?" "My name's Clara. I work here now." "Are you the new lady?" the same one asked. "I am." "The last one didn't like us," said the other, quieter one. He said it without self-pity, the way children state facts they have absorbed and accepted. Clara turned from the stove and crouched down to their level. She looked at both of them squarely. "Then the last one wasn't paying attention," she said. "What are your names?" "I'm Jesse," said the bold one. "I'm Samuel," said the quiet one. "Jesse and Samuel," she repeated. "Good solid names." She straightened and turned back to the stove. "Go wash your hands. Lunch will be ready in 10 minutes. Jesse narrowed his eyes at her, suspicious and curious in equal measure. "You're not going to yell at us?" "Not yet," she said. "Ask me again after lunch." She heard a small sound that might have been a laugh. From Samuel, she thought, the quiet one. And then the sound of 2 pairs of feet heading toward the washroom. She turned back to the beans and felt something move in her chest, unexpected and unwelcome. Something that ached. She pressed her lips together and kept stirring. Jack came in for lunch without ceremony, sat at the head of the table, and ate in near silence. The boys were noisy enough to compensate. Jesse knocked over his water cup. Samuel ate his entire portion and then looked mournfully at the pot like a man contemplating his regrets. Jesse asked Clara 3 times why the beans had onions in them. "Because onions have flavor," she told him. "I don't like flavor," Jesse announced. "You'll survive." Jack made a sound. He covered it quickly with a cough and looked at his plate. But Clara caught it. That almost sound, somewhere between surprise and reluctant amusement, and she filed it away without comment. After lunch, Jack went back out to the land. Clara cleaned the kitchen, started on the laundry, and spent 2 hours attacking the state of the living room, while the boys tore around outside under the watch of one of the ranch hands, a laconic man named Pete, who communicated mostly in grunts and appeared entirely unbothered by the chaos. By the time supper was done and the boys were herded reluctantly toward bed, Clara had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her back ached. Her hands were red from the washing. She was more tired than she had been in months. She didn't mind. Tired was good. Tired meant sleep. Sleep meant the night passed faster. She was banking the fire in the kitchen when she heard it. A sound from the boys' room upstairs. Not crying exactly. Something quieter, more sustained. She set down the poker and listened. It was Samuel. She recognized his voice. He was making a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like humming, but not quite. Like a child trying to soothe himself, trying very hard and not quite managing. She stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment. Then she went up. The door to their room was slightly open. She pushed it wider and looked in. Jesse was asleep, sprawled on his side of the bed, with the careless authority of a boy who had never once in his life worried about taking up too much space. Samuel was awake, lying rigid on his side, staring at the wall. "Samuel," she said quietly. He went still. "What's the matter?" A long pause, then, "Nothing. That doesn't sound like nothing." Another pause. She waited him out. "Sometimes I can't sleep," he said finally. His voice was very small. "Since Mama went away." The ache in her chest became something sharper. She breathed through it. "Do you want me to sit with you a spell?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, very carefully, like someone reaching for something they weren't sure they were allowed to want. "Yes, please." She came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside him. She didn't touch him. She didn't presume. She just sat. After a moment, she began to hum, very softly. A low, simple melody that didn't belong to any particular song. Something she had made up once, a long time ago, for May. Samuel was asleep within minutes. She sat there a little longer than she needed to. Just sat, with the quiet of the house around her and the sound of two small boys breathing, and something inside her that hurt in a way she couldn't entirely name. She was still sitting there when she became aware that someone else was in the doorway. She looked up. Jack Matthews stood in the hall, watching. He'd clearly come to check on the boys. He was still fully dressed, boots and all, and he had that look of a man who did this every night and didn't expect to talk about it. His expression was unreadable in the dim light. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. After a long moment, he stepped back from the doorway. She heard his boots moving quietly down the hall. She heard the door of his room open and close. She exhaled slowly. She looked at Samuel, at his small, still face, at the way Jesse had unconsciously shifted closer to his brother in sleep. She did not cry. She stood up carefully and moved to the door. In the hall, alone, she pressed her back against the wall for just a moment. Just one breath. One moment where she let herself feel the full weight of it. The ache, the want, the terrible tenderness of having been, for a few minutes, in a room full of sleeping children again. Then she squared her shoulders. She went downstairs. She went to her small room. She lay down on the narrow bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling. She had told Jack Matthews she wasn't going anywhere. She was beginning to understand exactly what kind of promise that was going to be. The next morning, Redwood Valley confirmed what Clara had half expected. She had gone into town with Pete to pick up supplies: flour, salt, a tin of coffee, thread.
This story was
It was
posted
a
on
simple
the
enough
channel
errand.
west of Betrayal.
She moved
Please
quickly
do not
through the dry
repost
goods
it
store,
in any form.
selecting what she needed, keeping to herself. She might have gotten away clean, if not for the two women near the fabric bolts. She didn't know their names yet. She would learn them soon enough. For now, she only knew their voices, carrying clearly and without any particular effort to be quiet. "That's her, the one Matthews hired." "Lord, where'd he find her?" "Harlan, I heard. Widow. No family." No family and no references. Maribel Dunn said she just showed up, pretty as you please, and he took her on. He must be desperate. Or something else. The pause that followed that particular observation was eloquent. Clara kept her eyes on the counter. She set her items down in front of the storekeeper, a lean, older man who had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable with what was being said 6 feet behind his paying customer. "That'll be $1.40, ma'am," he said, his voice careful and neutral. "Thank you," Clara said. She counted out the money. She did not look at the women. "You'd think a man in his position would be more careful," the first voice continued, as though Clara were simply not there. "With 2 motherless boys in the house, you never know what a woman like that might be after." Clara picked up her purchases. "A woman like that," she said, without turning around, her voice perfectly pleasant, "is after soap and flour and getting back to work before the bread dough rises too long." She nodded to the storekeeper. "Good day." She walked out into the heat of the afternoon and did not look back. Pete, waiting by the wagon, took one look at her face and said nothing. He helped her load the supplies. He climbed up. He clicked to the horse. Halfway back to the ranch, he said, without particular inflection, "Cown's been that way my whole life, always finding something to chew on." "I know how towns are," Clara said. "Matthews don't care what they say, just so you know." She looked at him. Pete kept his eyes on the road. "He lost his wife in December. Before that, he and Eleanor, it was a good marriage. Solid. She was good for him. Kept him from being too much in his own head." He paused. "He ain't been right since. Boys neither. It's been hard." Another pause. "He wouldn't have hired you if he didn't think you were good for the place. Jack Matthews don't do things he don't mean." Clara was quiet for a moment, then, "I appreciate you telling me that." "Just telling you what's true," Pete said. He clicked to the horse again, and they rode the rest of the way in companionable silence while the summer heat pressed down around them and the dry, golden land stretched out on every side. And Clara Walker, who had come to Redwood Valley to disappear, looked out at that land and breathed, and thought, with something almost like defiance, that she was still here. She was still standing. And for now, that was enough. 3 days into her time at the Double M Ranch, Clara understood 2 things with absolute certainty. The first was that Jesse Matthews had decided she was the enemy. The second was that he was testing her with the focused, methodical intensity of a general running a campaign. It started small. Her apron went missing and turned up stuffed behind the woodpile. The bucket she used for mopping appeared one morning at the bottom of the well. The bread she'd set to rise was found thoroughly deflated, with a suspicious handprint on its surface. Jessie sat at the breakfast table each morning with an expression of pure, beatific innocence that Clara recognized immediately, because she had worn the same expression herself at 4 years old. And it had meant the same thing then that it meant now. Samuel watched his brother with the resigned expression of a boy who knew what was happening and wanted no part of it, but was constitutionally incapable of tattling. Clara said nothing. She retrieved her apron. She hauled up the bucket. She started a second batch of bread. She did not raise her voice, did not withdraw her warmth, and did not give Jessie the satisfaction of a reaction. On the fourth morning, she set breakfast on the table, eggs, salt pork, biscuits, and sat down across from both boys. Jack had already gone out. It was just the three of them. Jessie was watching her over the rim of his cup, with that calculating 4-year-old look that was both maddening and secretly impressive. "Jessie," she said pleasantly, "how long are you planning to keep this up?" He blinked. "Keep what up?" "The war." Samuel made a small choking sound into his milk. Jessie set his cup down carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Clara cut her biscuit in half. "Last woman who worked here, the one who quit? Did she leave because of the work or because of you?" A long, telling pause. "Both," Samuel said, very quietly, not looking at either of them. Jessie shot his brother a look of pure betrayal. Clara nodded slowly. "I see." She took a bite of her biscuit, chewed, swallowed. Then she looked at Jessie directly, the way you look at someone you are taking seriously. "You want to know if I'm going to leave." Jessie said nothing, but his chin had come down slightly. The bravado had dropped, just for a second, just enough. "I'm not going to leave, Jessie." "You don't know that," he said. His voice was smaller than he intended it to be. "You're right," she said. "I don't." "Nobody knows what's coming, but I can tell you what I intend, and I intend to stay." She held his gaze. "So you can keep hiding my apron if you want. I'll keep finding it. We can do this as long as you need to." Jessie stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes, something young and scared and trying very hard not to be either. Then he picked up his fork and ate his eggs. It wasn't peace, but it was a ceasefire, and Clara knew the difference between the two. That afternoon, Jack came in from the far paddock early, his shirt dark with sweat, asking for water with the terse economy of a man unaccustomed to asking for anything. Clara handed him a full tin cup without comment. He drank it in one long pull, set it on the table. "How were they today?" he asked, not looking at her, looking at the table. "Fine," she said. He glanced up. He clearly did not believe her. "Jessie hid my mop bucket in the barn," she said, "and Samuel ate an extra biscuit he thought I didn't see. Other than that, perfectly fine." Something flickered across his face. "Clara." "It's all right," she said, cutting him off gently. "He's testing me. I'd rather he test me than shut down. At least when he's making mischief, he's still fighting." She paused. "Samuel worries me more." Jack went very still. "He's too quiet," she said. "Not shy quiet. Sad quiet. There's a difference." Jack turned away from her. He put both hands flat on the counter and stood there, his back to her, not saying a word. His shoulders were rigid. She waited. "His mother used to say the same thing about him," Jack said finally. His voice scraped flat. "Said he felt everything twice as deep as most people. Said she worried he'd carry too much when he grew up." The kitchen was very quiet. "She was right to worry," Clara said softly. "But she was also right to love him for it. Deep feelers are the ones who make the world worth living in." A beat. "He's going to be fine, Mr. Matthews. He just needs time." Jack didn't turn around, but she saw his hands relax slightly against the counter. Just slightly. "Jack," he said. She paused. "Sir?" "My name. It's Jack." He pushed off the counter and headed for the door. "Mr. Matthews was my father, and he was a difficult man." He walked out. Clara stood in the kitchen with an almost smile she kept carefully to herself. The gossip hit harder by the end of the first week. She had expected it.
This
Small
story was
towns had
posted
long
on the
memories
channel
and
west
short
of
mercy
Betrayal.
when it came
Please
to
do
women
not
who arrived
repost it
alone.
in any form.
But she hadn't anticipated the particular shape it would take in Redwood Valley, which was less like rumor and more like an organized campaign. It was Bert's wife who came to warn her, which surprised Clara, because she hadn't thought anyone in town would take her side. Her name was Harriet, a round, direct woman, who showed up at the ranch gate on Friday afternoon while Jack was out, and Clara was hanging laundry with the boys playing nearby. She introduced herself briefly, declined the offer of tea, and then folded her arms and spoke with the particular efficiency of a woman who has something to say and not much patience for preamble. "They're saying you came here to catch yourself a husband," Harriet said. "The Ladies' Aid Society is talking about sending a committee to speak to Jack about propriety, about the example he's setting for his boys." Clara finished pinning a shirt to the line. "Is that what they're saying?" "Among other things. Hattie Drummond started a whole, I don't even know what to call it, a crusade. She thinks the children are being exposed to a woman of questionable character." "Hattie Drummond doesn't know a thing about my character." "No," Harriet agreed. "She doesn't. But that's never stopped Hattie." She looked at Clara steadily. "I'm telling you because my husband likes you, and because I've got eyes. You're not what they're saying you are, and I think you deserve to know what you're walking into when you go to town." Clara looked at her for a long moment. Then, "How bad does it get?" Harriet didn't flinch from the question. "Bad enough that the last 2 women who worked here left. One of them cried when she came to tell Bert. Said she couldn't take the way people looked at her." A pause. "You seem like a harder sort than that." "I am," Clara said simply. "Good," Harriet nodded. "Then stay. Jack Matthews is a decent man underneath all that wall he's built up, and those boys need somebody who isn't going to run." She left the same way she came, quick, purposeful, no wasted words. Clara stood there in the afternoon heat and thought about walls and what it cost to keep them standing. That evening she found Eleanor's things. She hadn't been snooping. She had been searching for an extra blanket. It had turned cold the previous night in a way she hadn't expected for July, and Samuel had woken shivering, and she opened the wrong door on the second floor. The room was clearly a spare, or had been meant to be, but along one wall there were boxes, carefully packed, labeled in handwriting that wasn't Jack's, looped and feminine, letters that leaned forward like they were in a hurry. Clara stood in the doorway. She didn't go in. She could see from where she stood the corner of a blue dress folded neatly on top of the nearest open box, a woman's hairbrush, a small framed picture she couldn't quite make out. Eleanor. She pulled the door quietly shut. She stood in the hall for a moment, pressing her forehead briefly against the door. Then she straightened and went to get the blanket from the linen closet 2 doors down, where it had been all along, and she had simply not looked carefully enough. She didn't mention the room. Not that night, not any night after. But she thought about it, about what it meant that the things were still there, packed but not removed, not given away, not burned, not buried, just kept, held, as though the man who packed them couldn't decide what putting them away actually meant. She understood that feeling more than she wanted to. The twist came on a Sunday. She had not expected Sunday to be any different from the other days. Ranch work didn't observe the Sabbath, in her experience, and Jack Matthews did not seem like a man who took mornings slowly. But something was different that morning. The house was quieter. Jack stayed at the table after breakfast longer than usual. The boys sat beside him without their usual restless energy, subdued in some way she couldn't immediately identify. Then Jessie said, very quietly, "It's Mama's birthday." The room went absolutely still. Jack's jaw worked. He set his coffee cup down with a care that was slightly too deliberate. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Samuel reached over and put his hand on his father's forearm. Just laid it there, small and certain, the way children will sometimes touch you with a directness that grown adults have entirely lost. Clara stood at the sink with her back to all of them. She kept her hands in the water. "Do you want to visit the grave?" she asked. Her voice was steady. The silence stretched. Then Jack said, "It's not in town. I buried her on the South Hill, on the property." A beat. She wanted to be here, on the land. "Then go," Clara said. She turned around. She looked at all three of them, the man with the locked face and the two boys with the wide, solemn eyes. "I'll have lunch ready when you get back." "You could," Samuel started. He stopped. "Samuel," Jack said, a warning in his voice. "I just meant—" Samuel looked at Clara with those deep, serious eyes of his. "You could come, if you wanted." Clara looked at the boy for a long moment. She looked at Jack, who was staring at the table, something fierce and painful working through the lines of his face. She could feel the exact weight of what was being asked, not just by the child, but by the whole moment. "That's your time with her," Clara said gently. "That belongs to your family." She picked up the dish towel and dried her hands. "Go on." They went. She stood in the kitchen alone and felt something she couldn't name move through her like a current. She reached into her skirt pocket and felt the ribbon without taking it out. May would have been 2 this summer. She pressed her lips together hard and started on the lunch dishes. When they came back 2 hours later, the boys were red-eyed and somehow lighter, the way children get after they've cried honestly and completely. Jack was not red-eyed, but he looked opened somehow, like something that had been sealed for a long time had breathed. He came through the kitchen door and stopped when he saw the table. She had made a real lunch: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread. She had found wildflowers in the yard that the boys had picked last week and left in a jar, and she'd put them in the center of the table. He looked at the table. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I know," she said. "Sit down." He sat. The boys sat. And for the first time since Clara had come to the Double M Ranch, they had a meal where no one talked about logistics or chores or the state of the dry goods supply. Jesse told a long, rambling story about a frog he'd found in the barn. Samuel ate slowly and seriously, and asked Clara twice if she wanted the last piece of bread, with a solemnity that made the question feel oddly ceremonial. And Jack Matthews, for the span of that meal, did not look like a man holding a wall up. He looked, for the space of an hour, like someone who had set it down. The trouble came that evening, the way trouble usually did, sideways, from a direction she hadn't been watching. She was in the barn. She'd gone out after supper to check on the mare, one of the horses Jack used for working the land, who had seemed off her feed for the last 2 days. She was talking quietly to the animal. She always talked to animals. It was a habit she'd never analyzed. When she heard the gate, a man she didn't recognize came through, broad-shouldered, well-dressed by ranch standards, with the easy confidence of someone who considered himself important. He stopped when he saw her. "Where's Matthews?" he said, without bothering with hello. "In the house," she said. "Can I help you?" The man looked her over in a way that was not quite respectful. "So you're the widow he hired." He said it like it was interesting, like she was a curiosity he was examining. "Heard about you." "People seem to," she said. "Name's Harlan Briggs." He said it like he expected her to react to it. "I've got business with Jack. Tell him I'm here." "You can tell him yourself," she said. "Front door's on the other side of the house." Briggs looked at her. a slow, measuring look. "You've got a mouth on you for a
This
woman in
story
your
was
position."
posted on the channel west
"My
of Betrayal.
position," she said,
Please do not
very
repost
evenly,
it in any form.
"is that I work this ranch, and I'm busy. The front door, Mr. Briggs. Jack Matthews is inside." Something moved in his expression, something cold and calculating that she didn't like. He looked at the house, then back at her. "You planning on staying long?" "As long as I'm needed." He said it like he knew something she didn't. Like the word contained a joke she wasn't in on yet. Then he tipped his hat, a minimal gesture, barely courtesy, and walked toward the house. Clara stood in the barn and watched him go, and felt something at the back of her neck. Not quite fear. Something else. The particular alertness of a woman who had learned the hard way to pay attention to men who looked at her like she was something temporary. She went back to the mare, but her mind was on the house. 15 minutes later, she heard raised voices. She couldn't make out words, but she knew the sound of an argument, the rhythm of it, the sharp edges. Jack's voice, lower. Briggs, more aggressive. Something that sounded like a question answered with a flat refusal. Then the front door opened. Briggs came out. He moved fast, the way a man moves when he's angry but has decided to hide it. He swung onto his horse without looking back at the house. He looked at the barn, though. He looked directly at where Clara was standing in the shadow of the doorway. He looked at her for a long, deliberate second. Then he rode out. Clara turned to find Jack coming toward her from the house. His face was set and hard, the wall back up with reinforcements. "Who is he?" she asked. "Man who wants to buy my land," Jack said. He stopped beside her and looked out at the road Briggs had taken, at the dust still rising from the horse's hooves. "Third time he's come around." "And you've said no." "3 times," his jaw tightened. "He's going to keep coming." Clara looked at him. "Why does he want it?" "Water rights. There's a creek on the south boundary that runs year-round. In a drought year, that creek is worth more than the land around it." He paused. "He made me an offer today. A big one." "And?" "And I said no." He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes was harder than usual. Harder and more complicated. "This is Eleanor's land. She's buried on it. I'm not selling it." The silence between them was heavy and real. "He'll come back," Clara said. "I know." "He looked at me like he was planning something," she said. She said it directly, without softening it. "I don't know what it is, but I'd watch him." Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I intend to." And his voice was different now. Not softer exactly, but more honest. Like a man who had decided, sometime in the last few seconds, to stop talking to her like she was just the help. Clara. He said her name like it was a different kind of word this time. "I need you to know." He stopped. She waited. He tried again. "What Briggs said to you, or however he said it. It's not—" He stopped again. The wall was back. The wall was almost back. He was fighting it and losing. "You're not just— You're doing a good job. With the house. And with them." He said the last word quietly, meaning the boys. And it cost him something to say it. She could see that plainly. Clara held his gaze for a long, steady moment. She thought about the ribbon in her pocket. She thought about May. She thought about what it was to love something and lose it, and still have to wake up the next morning and function. "I know what it is," she said quietly. "To love people you're afraid of losing." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Something in Jack Matthews' face, something behind the wall, behind the grief and the stubbornness and the months of trying to hold everything together alone, shifted. just slightly, just enough. He nodded once. He went back to the house. Clara stayed in the barn a while longer with the mare, who finally, tentatively, accepted a handful of feed from her palm. Progress, Clara thought, small and quiet and real. She understood by now that this was how the most important things always happened, not in grand moments, not in declarations, but in the smallest possible increments. A boy who stopped hiding her apron. A man who said her name differently. A horse who finally trusted her hand. She pressed her palm flat against the animal's nose and breathed. Outside, the summer night was settling in, thick and warm and full of the sound of crickets and the far-off calling of a night bird. And somewhere in the house above the dark yard, she could hear Jesse's voice carrying through an open window, telling Samuel something with great conviction, the specific cadence of a boy who was certain he was right about something that probably didn't matter at all. And Samuel's answering sound, quiet, low, a small sound of skeptical disagreement. She stood in the dark and listened to those two voices going back and forth, and something turned over in her chest, something that hurt and felt like warmth at the same time. Those two things so tangled together now, she couldn't have separated them if she'd tried. She pressed the ribbon in her pocket. Then she walked back to the house, because there were boys who needed checking on, and a man who had finally, almost, called her by her name. And tomorrow would come, whether she was ready for it or not. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Clara knew it was important before Jack even opened it, because the man who delivered it, a rider from town, not the regular post, waited at the gate instead of leaving it at the door. Waited with the deliberate patience of someone who had been told to confirm receipt. Jack took it, read the front, and went still in a way Clara had learned to watch for. The kind of still that meant something had hit him hard, and he was deciding how to absorb it before anyone could see the impact. "Go inside," he told the boys, who were hovering with the electromagnetic pull children have toward anything adults consider private. "But," Jesse started, "inside. Now." They went. Clara turned to follow them, and Jack said, "Not you." She stopped. He broke the seal and read. She watched his face and saw the stillness become something harder, his jaw set. The hand holding the letter tightened until the paper creased. He handed it to her without a word. She read it. It was from a lawyer in Denver, representing Harlan Briggs. It laid out, in the cool, precise language that lawyers use when they want to make something monstrous sound routine, a claim that a portion of the Double M's southern boundary, the portion containing the year-round creek, had been sold to Briggs' father by Jack's father in 1871. A deed, allegedly signed and witnessed, was attached as evidence. The creek, the letter stated, had never legally belonged to the Matthews family. Briggs was prepared to be generous and allowed Jack to purchase it back, at a price that was approximately 3 times what the land was worth. If Jack declined, the letter continued, legal proceedings would begin within 30 days. Clara lowered the letter. "Is it real?" she asked. "The deed?" "I don't know." His voice was flat as iron. "My father did business with old Gerald Briggs 20 years ago. I was 12. I don't know what they signed." He took the letter back and folded it with a precision that looked like controlled anger. "Without that creek, this ranch doesn't survive a drought year. We lose the south pasture first. Then the herd can't sustain." "Can you get a lawyer?" "Nearest one's in Harlan. Cost money I don't have sitting around." He looked at the folded letter. "Briggs knows that. He's been watching this place long enough to know exactly where the pressure points are." Clara looked at him. "He came here to see the ranch, to see you. He was measuring you." "Yes." "And he saw me." Jack's eyes came up. "He looked at me like I was something he could use," she said. "I didn't understand it then. I do now." She held Jack's gaze steadily. If he can make enough noise about me,
This story was
about my
posted
being
on the
here,
channel West
about
of
what the
Betrayal.
town is already saying,
Please do not repost
he
it
doesn't
in
just
any
hurt
form.
your reputation. He gives the judge reason to question your character, your fitness. A beat. Your fitness as a father. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd heard in weeks. He wouldn't, Jack said. But the word came out wrong, not certain enough. He already started, Clara said quietly. The Ladies' Aid Society, the committee talk. That didn't come from nowhere, Jack. Someone planted that seed. Jack stared at her. Then he turned away sharply and hit the porch railing with the flat of his hand. Not in rage, but in the specific frustration of a man who has just realized he walked into something he should have seen coming. I should send you away, he said. His back was to her. If you do that, you hand him exactly what he wants, she said. A woman who ran, a scandal that stuck, and you still lose the creek. He turned around slowly. She stood her ground. I'm not leaving, Jack. They looked at each other across the length of the porch, and something in that space between them, something that had been building quietly for 2 weeks, something neither of them had named or examined, pressed up against the surface of the moment and stayed there, breathing. All right, he said finally. His voice was rough. You're not leaving. He went inside. Clara stood on the porch a moment longer and looked out at the south pasture, at the creek she couldn't see but knew was there, running cool and constant in the July heat. Then she went back to the kitchen, because there were boys who hadn't had lunch yet, and a ranch that required functioning, regardless of what Harlan Briggs had set in motion. The week that followed was a war fought in slow motion. Briggs didn't come to the ranch again, but his presence arrived through other people, in the pointed questions from the storekeeper when Clara came for supplies, in the way Hattie Drummond crossed the street rather than pass her on the walk, in the rider who came through twice looking at the south fence line as though measuring it for something. Jack rode to Harlan on Thursday to find the lawyer. He came back late, after dark, and said only that the deed looked old, but not necessarily legitimate, and that it would take time and money to contest, and that time was the one thing Briggs was deliberately not giving him. He said it standing in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hand, dust on everything, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was starting to feel the weight in his bones. Sit down, Clara said. I'm fine. Jack, sit down. He sat down. She put food in front of him. He ate mechanically, the way exhausted men eat, without tasting, without stopping, just fueling the machine. She sat across the table with her coffee and didn't speak until he pushed the plate back. What aren't you telling me? She asked. He looked up. You've been somewhere else since you got back, she said. Not just tired. Something else. A long pause. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. The lawyer said that if Briggs takes this to court and wins the water rights, the bank will call the loan I took out last year. It's collateralized against the whole south section. He kept his eyes on the cup. I'd lose the house, Clara. The whole property. The kitchen was very quiet. Where would the boys go? She asked, carefully. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Is there family? Eleanor had a sister in Missouri. She and I... He stopped. We didn't part on good terms after Eleanor died. She wanted the boys. I refused. His jaw tightened. She'd take them. She'd do it right, too. She loved Eleanor. He picked up the coffee cup and set it down again without drinking. But they're mine. They're all I've got left of Eleanor, and I am not. His voice dropped. I am not losing them. Clara pressed both hands flat on the table. She felt the ribbon in her pocket. She thought about May, who she had held and lost, and about what it was to have nothing left but the having of someone, and about how far a person would go to keep from losing that too. "Then we fight," she said. He looked at her. "You are not losing this ranch," she said, "and you are not losing those boys. So we fight." She held his gaze. "Tell me what you need. I'll do it." The thing that moved through his expression then was complicated and real, and she made herself look directly at it without flinching. It was something between gratitude and grief, and something else that neither of them was anywhere near ready to call by its name. "Why?" he said. Just that. She looked at him for a long moment. "Because your boys sleep better since I came," she said finally. "And that matters to me. That's enough." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. He nodded. He went to bed. Clara sat at the kitchen table a while longer and felt the summer heat sitting heavy on everything, and thought about the things people fight for and what it costs to stand still when the ground is moving. The storm announced itself 4 days later, not with drama, at first. The sky went a particular shade in the late afternoon that the ranch hands recognized before anyone else did. Pete came in from the east field at a trot, which was notable because Pete had not been seen moving faster than a deliberate walk in anyone's memory. "Bad one coming," he told Jack, short and certain. "Could be bad." By the time supper was done, the wind had picked up in a way that made the horses restless. Clara got the boys inside and watched the sky change through the kitchen window, going green at the edges in that specific way that meant this was not an ordinary summer storm. "Stay inside," Jack told all of them, pulling on his coat. "I need to get the horses secured. Pete's with me." "How long?" Clara asked. "Hour, maybe less." He looked at her directly. "Keep them inside, Clara, no matter what." "I will." He left. The door banged behind him in a wind that had doubled in the last 10 minutes. Jessie appeared at her elbow. "Is it a tornado?" "It might be," she kept her voice steady, "which is why you are going to sit down right there and not move." "I'm not scared," Jessie announced. "Good," she said. "Then it'll be easy to sit still." Samuel was already sitting at the table, his hands folded, his face serious. He was looking at her with those deep, watchful eyes of his. "Are you scared?" he asked. She looked at him honestly. "A little," she said. "But scared is just your body paying attention. It doesn't mean something bad is going to happen." Samuel nodded slowly, as though filing that away. The first real impact of the storm came without much warning. A crack and a crash from the side of the house that shook the walls and sent Jessie off his chair and across the room to grab Clara's arm. Pure instinct wiping out every pretense of not being scared. She put her hand over his without comment and kept her other arm free. "That was a tree," she said. "The house is fine. Stay here." She went to the door and opened it a crack. The wind hit her like a wall. Outside, the world had gone dark and loud and wild, and through the chaos she could see the barn, the door swinging open, banging against the frame, something dark pouring out. Not something, someone. One of the hands, stumbling, yelling something at her she couldn't hear. She pushed the door closed and turned to the boys. Jessie was right behind her. Samuel was at the table where she'd left him. "You need to go upstairs," she said. "Both of you. To your room. Close the door. Get under the bed if it gets worse. Do you understand?" "But," Jessie started. "Jessie!" She crouched down to his level and held his face in both hands and looked directly into his eyes. "I need you to protect your brother right now. Can you do that?" Jesse swallowed. His chin was trembling. He looked older than 4 and younger than 4 at the same time.
This story
"Yes,"
was
he
posted
said.
on the channel west of
"Go."
Betrayal. Please do not
They went.
repost it in any form.
She heard their feet on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close. She turned back to the door, pulled her coat off the hook, and went out into the storm. The wind was a physical thing. It didn't push, it hammered, wave after wave of it coming from the northwest with a sound like freight trains piling up. She bent her head and moved toward the barn, because that was where she'd seen the hands stumbling, and the barn was where the horses were, and Jack and Pete were trying to hold everything together in the dark. She found the ranch hand, a young man named Cody, barely 20, sitting against the fence with a gash on his forehead and both hands pressed to it. He was conscious, confused. "Where's Jack?" she shouted over the wind. He pointed toward the south. The south. She straightened and looked in that direction and saw nothing at first. Then lightning cracked open the sky, and in that second of white light, she saw Jack, alone, 50 yards out, struggling with something on the ground. A fence section that had come down. He was trying to drag it clear of the paddock gate. And behind him, in the next flash, she saw the gate itself. Open. The paddock gate was open. She ran. It wasn't a thought-out decision. Her body made it before her mind had finished the equation. She was running across the yard into the full weight of the storm because that gate was open. And she had put 2 boys upstairs, and then she thought, and her blood turned cold. She hadn't seen them go upstairs. She had heard feet on the stairs. She had heard the bedroom door close. But she had not seen them. She veered back toward the house, burst through the back door. "Jesse! Samuel!" Silence. She took the stairs at a run and hit the bedroom door. Open. Empty. The window at the end of the hall, the small window she always kept latched, was hanging open, banging in the wind. Her heart dropped straight through the floor. She went back down and out the front and ran into the storm screaming their names, and the wind took her voice and threw it away like it was nothing. Lightning again. She turned in a full circle in the yard, looking, searching, the rain hitting her so hard now she could barely keep her eyes open. She heard it in a gap between the thunder, small, high, coming from her left. She ran toward it. They were huddled in the old equipment shed at the edge of the yard. Jesse had gotten the door open and pulled Samuel inside, and now had his arms around his brother with a fierceness that made Clara's chest crack clean in half. Samuel was crying. Jesse was not crying. Jesse was shaking hard and not crying, which was somehow worse. She got inside and pulled both of them against her in one motion, one arm around each of them, pulling them in, and Jesse, who had not let her hug him once in the 3 weeks she'd been there, who had deflected and dodged and kept his careful distance. Jesse grabbed the front of her coat with both hands and buried his face in her shoulder and held on. She held them back, hard, the way you hold something you almost lost. "I've got you," she said, over and over, her voice wrecked. "I've got you. I've got you both." She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Long enough for the worst of the storm to start breaking, the wind dropping in stages, the rain pulling back from a roar to a steady drumming. Long enough for Samuel to stop shaking. Long enough for Jesse's grip on her coat to loosen slightly, though he did not let go. She became aware of a presence in the doorway. She looked up. Jack Matthews stood at the entrance of the shed, soaking wet, a cut on his jaw from something she hadn't noticed before. His hat gone. He stood absolutely still in the diminishing rain and looked at the 3 of them, at his sons, at Clara, and the expression on his face was something she had no word for. It was not relief exactly, though relief was in it. It was not gratitude, though that was there too. It was the expression of a man who has just looked over the edge of something terrible and found, against all expectation, that the worst thing did not happen. And the finding is so overwhelming, he cannot quite yet trust it. His eyes met hers over the boys' heads. She held his gaze. She had no language for this moment and did not try to find one. Jesse spoke first, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "We just wanted to see the lightning," he said. It came out small and guilty and entirely Jesse. "We weren't supposed to." "No," Clara said. "You weren't. Are you going to be angry?" She pressed her lips against the top of his head. She felt his hair wet under her mouth. "Later," she said. "Right now, I'm just glad you're here." Jack crossed the shed in 3 steps and came down on one knee in front of his boys. He put his hands on both of them, one on Jesse's back, one on Samuel's shoulder. And he didn't say anything for a long moment. Just held them there. Just breathed. Then Samuel looked up at his father with his serious, solemn face and said, "Clara came out in the storm for us, Papa." Jack looked at her. She looked back. "She did," he said. His voice had something in it that she couldn't quite name. "She did." Jesse finally, slowly, let go of her coat. He sat back and looked at her with something entirely new in his face. Something that had nothing to do with testing or fighting or survival strategy. Something younger than all of that. Something that had been waiting a long time for permission. "Clara?" he said. "Yeah?" He looked at her with those dark eyes, so much like his father's, so much like his mother's image in that folded photograph she'd never quite seen. "I'm sorry I put your bucket in the well." Clara felt something move through her that she didn't have a name for and didn't try to find one. She put her hand on the side of his face, very gently. "I know you are," she said, "and I forgive you." The storm finished breaking around them. The rain settled to a murmur. Outside the shed, somewhere across the yard, one of the horses called out. Uncertain, searching, and was answered by another. Jack stood. He lifted Samuel in one arm. Jesse stood up on his own, though he stayed close enough to Clara that his shoulder was pressed against her arm. The 4 of them walked out of the shed together, into the clearing night, into the smell of rain-washed earth and the sound of the world settling back into itself. Clara's hand found Jesse's without either of them deciding to. He held it. Small fingers wrapped around hers, certain and real. And Jack watched it happen from 2 feet away with an expression on his face that looked like something coming apart and something coming together at exactly the same time. She didn't look at him. She wasn't ready. And neither was he. But the distance between them, the careful, deliberate, self-protective distance they had both been maintaining with the disciplined effort of 2 people who knew exactly how much it would cost to close it, had changed tonight. She could feel it. She suspected he could too. The morning after the storm, Redwood Valley had opinions. Clara heard them before she even reached town. She had gone in with Pete for supplies. The storm had taken out part of the fence line, and they needed wire, nails, lumber, and the looks started at the edge of the main street and didn't stop. Not the usual sideways glances she'd grown accustomed to. Something more deliberate, more organized. Harriet met her outside the dry goods store with her arms folded and her expression tight. "Hattie Drummond's been busy this morning," she said, low and fast. "She's telling people you let the boys out in the storm, that you were negligent, that Jack's children nearly died because of you." Clara went very still. "That's not what happened," she said. "I know that. You know that. But Hattie's talking to anyone who'll listen, and in this town, that's most people, before 9 in the morning. Harriet's eyes were steady and serious. She went to see Reverend Cole last night. She's asking him to speak to Jack, formally, about your continued
This story was
presence in that
posted on the
house.
channel West of Betrayal.
Clara absorbed
Please do not
this.
repost it
She
in
kept
any
her face
form.
composed by an act of will that cost her considerably. "There's more," Harriet said. Of course there was. Briggs was at the saloon last night, buying drinks and talking about Jack's situation, about the legal claim on the creek. He made it sound like Jack was already finished, like it was settled. Harriet paused. He said that a man who can't keep his own house in order can't be trusted to manage a disputed land claim. The pieces clicked together in Clara's mind with a precision that made her chest cold. Briggs hadn't just filed a legal claim. He was building a picture, a rancher in chaos, motherless boys nearly lost in a storm, a woman of questionable character living in the house, a property in dispute, a man who couldn't manage any of it. He was going to use every single piece of it in court, and the town was handing it to him willingly. "He's going to try to take everything," Clara said. "Yes," Harriet said simply. "I think he is." Clara bought the supplies. She loaded them with Pete in near silence. On the way back to the ranch, she sat straight on the wagon seat and watched the road, and thought with a cold, focused clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. The same clarity she'd used to survive the winter after May died, after Thomas left, after everything. The clarity that came not from hope, but from the decision to act. She was not going to let this happen. Jack was at the damaged fence line when they returned, working alongside Cody, with the focused intensity of a man who processes trouble through his hands. He looked up when she climbed down from the wagon. He read her face in about 3 seconds. "Tell me," he said. She told him, all of it. Hattie, Briggs at the saloon, the picture being built. She didn't soften it, and she didn't editorialize. She laid it out the way Harriet had laid it out to her, fast, clear, and honest. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He's using you," Jack said. "Using your being here." "Yes." "If I let you go, it won't stop him," she cut in. "And it won't fix what the town already thinks. Sending me away now just confirms everything Hattie Drummond has been saying. It looks like guilt." She held his gaze. "The only thing that changes this is you. Standing up in that town and saying plainly what I am here and what I am not." His jaw tightened. "And what are you here, Clara?" The question was not what it sounded like on the surface. She understood that. He was not asking for a job title. He was asking something harder, something that both of them had been circling for weeks, with the careful deliberation of two people who had both been burned badly enough to respect fire. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the shed, about Jessie's hands gripping her coat, about Samuel's voice saying she came out in the storm for us, Papa. "I'm someone who's not leaving," she said. "That's what I am. Whatever else we call it, that part is true." Something moved through his expression, raw and real and quickly controlled. He nodded once. He picked up his tools and went back to the fence. But his shoulders had changed. Something in the set of them. Clara went back to the house. The Reverend came that afternoon. She opened the door to find Reverend Cole on the porch, a thin, well-meaning man in his 60s, with kind eyes and the uncomfortable expression of someone who has been asked to do something he isn't entirely sure is right. Behind him, at a distance calculated to look uninvolved but still be visible, Hattie Drummond stood with 2 other women from the Ladies' Aid Society. Clara looked at the Reverend. She looked at Hattie. She looked back at the Reverend. "Reverend Cole," she said, "would you like to come in?" "Mrs. Walker." He removed his hat. I wonder if I might have a word with Mr. Matthews. He's working the fence line. I can get him if you need him. Or you can speak to me." She stepped back from the door, an invitation that left him no comfortable way to decline. He came in. She did not invite the women on the walk, and they did not push it, though she could feel Hattie's gaze on her back like a brand. She sat the Reverend at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee. She sat across from him and waited. He was not a cruel man. She could see that. He was a man who had been given a task by someone with more social force than good sense, and he was trying to perform it with as much decency as possible. "There is concern," he began carefully, "in the community, about the arrangement here, about the propriety of the situation. You are a single woman. Mr. Matthews is a widower. There are young children in the home." "There are," Clara said, "who needed someone to care for them, which is why Jack hired me." Of course. The Reverend turned his coffee cup. "But you understand how it appears." "I understand how some people have decided it appears," she said. "That's not the same thing." She kept her voice even and respectful. "Reverend, I have been here 4 weeks. I have cooked and cleaned and cared for those boys every day. I was the one who found them in the storm last night and held them until it passed. I have done nothing, not one single thing, that any decent woman in this town wouldn't do in my position." He looked at her. "Now." She folded her hands on the table. "I respect your office. I respect that you came here in good faith. But I'd like you to ask yourself who benefits from me leaving this house. Who has something to gain if Jack Matthews looks like a man who can't keep order? Who sent those women out there to stand on the walk so that whatever happens here today has witnesses?" The Reverend was quiet. "Briggs," he said slowly. "I imagine that name has come up recently in conversations you didn't think were connected to this one," Clara said. He set his coffee down. He looked at the table. He looked like a man rearranging several things in his mind simultaneously. "I was not aware," he said carefully, "of all the dimensions of this situation." "Most people aren't," Clara said. "Harlan Briggs is very good at keeping the dimensions separate." The Reverend stood. He put his hat back on. He looked at her with something that was close to respect and somewhat mixed with chagrin. "I'll speak to Hattie," he said. "I'd appreciate that," Clara said. "And Reverend," he paused, "tell her the boys are fine, in case she was actually worried and not just useful." He left. Clara watched through the window as he spoke to the women outside. She couldn't hear words, but she could read the conversation by the way Hattie's posture changed, stiffening, then a visible protest, then the particular stillness of a woman who has just been told something she didn't expect. The group dispersed. Slowly, and not happily, but they dispersed. Clara exhaled. Behind her, a small voice said, "You were really good at that." She turned. Jesse was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, which meant he had been there for most of the conversation. His eyes were wide, and something in them looked almost like awe. "You were supposed to be outside," she said. "I know." He didn't move.
"Clara, is somebody trying to make Papa lose the ranch?"
She looked at him. 4 years old, and those eyes saw everything. "Someone is trying," she said. "We're not going to let them." Jesse considered this with the gravity of a small general. "What do we do?" "We do what we've been doing," she said. "We stay. We work. We don't give anybody a reason." She paused. "And we trust your father." Jesse nodded slowly. Then he stood up, brushed off his trousers with great dignity, and went out the back door. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Just a moment. Then she started on supper. The twist came from a direction nobody expected. It was Samuel who found it. Samuel, who was quiet and watchful, and noticed things that
This
other
story
people
was
walked
posted
past,
on the channel west
who had
of
spent the
Betrayal.
week since the storm
Please do not
following
repost
Clara
it
with a
in any
new,
form.
settled quality to him, like a child who has made a decision and is at peace with it. He came to her on a Wednesday afternoon with a piece of paper in his hands. Old paper, the kind that had been folded and refolded many times, the creases worn soft. He held it out to her without preamble. "I found this," he said, "in Mama's things, in the boxes upstairs. I was looking for her picture because I wanted to see her face, and I forgot where Papa put the frame and—" He stopped. His voice had gotten careful. "I think it's important. I don't know why, but I think it is." Clara took the paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in that forward-leaning handwriting she recognized from the boxes. Eleanor's handwriting. Dated March of 1883, 4 years ago, the year after the twins were born. She read it once, quickly, then again, slowly. Then she sat down. It was a letter Eleanor had written to Jack, the kind of letter a woman writes when she needs to put something in permanent form, when she needs there to be a record. Eleanor had written it after a conversation with old Gerald Briggs, Harlan's father, who had come to the ranch drunk and angry about a water dispute, and had said, among other things, that any deed his son claimed to hold on the South Creek boundary was a forgery. That Gerald himself had never signed anything. That Harlan had been trying to manufacture a claim for years, and that Eleanor should warn Jack. Gerald Briggs had died 6 months after this letter was written, of natural causes, leaving behind, apparently, a son who had continued building a fraudulent claim for 4 more years, until the drought made the creek worth enough to act on. Clara sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letter in her hands and heard her own heartbeat. She heard the front door. Jack. She knew his step by now. "Jack." Her voice came out strange, steady but strange. "Come here." He came into the kitchen. He took one look at her face and crossed to the table. She held the letter out. He read it. She watched him read it, watched his face go through several things in sequence. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, then something fierce and hot and barely contained. "Samuel found it," she said, "in Eleanor's boxes." Jack looked up. He looked at his son, who had not moved from the doorway, and was watching his father with that serious, steady gaze. Jack stood up. He crossed to Samuel in 4 steps and went down on one knee and held his son's face in both hands. "You found this yourself?" he said. Samuel nodded. "I was looking for Mama's picture. I wanted to see her." His voice was very small. "Is it important?" Jack pulled his son against him, hard. He held him there, his hand on the back of Samuel's head, his jaw working with something that was not quite words. "Yeah, buddy," he said finally, his voice rough at every edge. "It's important." A breath.
This
"Your
story
mama
was
just
posted
saved
on the
this
channel
ranch."
west of Betrayal. Please do
Samuel's
not repost
arms
it
came
in
up
any
around his
form.
father's neck and held on. Clara looked at the letter in her hands. She thought about Eleanor, a woman she had never met, whose handwriting she recognized, whose children she had held in a storm, whose husband she had watched slowly, carefully, reluctantly begin to live again. A woman who had, in a moment of careful foresight 4 years ago, written down what she knew and folded it away and trusted that it would find the right hands at the right time. It had. That evening, Jack rode to Harlan. He went alone at dusk, with a letter in his pocket and a particular expression on his face that Clara recognized from the porch argument and the fence line and the kitchen table. The expression of a man who has decided to fight and has stopped worrying about whether he'll win. He told Clara he'd be back by midnight. He told her not to wait up. She waited up. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low and the boys long asleep and the summer night pressing warm against the windows. And she thought about all the things she had not planned when she stepped off the coach in Redwood Valley. The job she'd taken to disappear. The man who'd hired her with a 2-sentence warning about his difficult temperament. The boys who had taken 3 weeks to let her in, and then let her in completely and all at once, the way children do. She reached into her pocket. She took the ribbon out. May's ribbon, faded blue, the edge that cut her palm if she pressed it too hard. And she laid it flat on the table and looked at it. She had been carrying it for 14 months, like a wound she wouldn't let close. Like if she let it close, it meant she was forgetting. Like grief was the only honest way to love what you'd lost. She sat with that thought for a long time. She thought about what Samuel had said that day at lunch, 3 weeks ago now. The last one didn't like us. Said it without self-pity, a fact he'd absorbed and accepted, the way children accept things when they have no other choice. She thought about Jessie's hands on her coat in the storm. She thought about Jack's voice, saying she came out in the storm for us, Papa. Not what it meant, just the fact of it, the plainness of it. She picked the ribbon up and held it in both hands and let herself feel it, the whole of it. May and Thomas and the winter and the coach and every mile she'd put between herself and the woman she'd been before she came here. And then she did something she hadn't done in 14 months. She cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly at the kitchen table, in the low lamplight, until she was empty enough to breathe properly. Then she wiped her face. She folded the ribbon with care and placed it in her pocket. She blew her nose with a kitchen rag and was not proud of it. She put the kettle on. Jack came back at 11:30. She heard the horse, heard him in the stable, heard his boots on the porch. The door opened, and he stepped in and stopped when he saw her at the table with the lamp and the kettle. "I said don't wait up," he said. "You did," she agreed. "Tea?" He looked at her for a moment. He sat down. "The lawyer thinks Eleanor's letter is enough to challenge the deed," he said. "Gerald Briggs's statement, even second-hand, combined with handwriting analysis on the deed itself. He says Briggs fabricated the signature. He's seen this kind of thing before." He folded his hands on the table. "He's filing to halt the legal proceedings tomorrow morning. Wants to take it before the circuit judge next month." "Will it hold?" "He thinks so. He's done this long enough to know when he's got something." Jack paused. "Briggs is going to know by tomorrow that the letter exists. He won't be happy." "What will he do?" "Something," Jack said. "I don't know what yet. But Briggs doesn't lose quietly." He looked at the table. "I want you to be careful, Clara. In town, coming and going. I want Pete to go with you until this is settled." She looked at him. "You're worried." "I'm practical," he said. But his eyes said the other thing. She poured his tea. She set it in front of him. She sat back down. The kitchen was quiet between them. Not uncomfortably quiet. The kind of quiet that exists between two people who have stopped needing to fill the air with words. "Jack," she said. He looked up. "Eleanor knew," she said, "about the letter. She wrote it down because she knew it might matter someday. She was thinking about this ranch and this family when she did that." She paused. "She sounds like she was a very good woman." Something moved through his face, something that hurt and was not ashamed of hurting. "She was the best person I ever knew," he said. His voice was rough and honest. "I have been so angry at her for leaving. I know that's not... I know she didn't choose it. But I
This
have
story
been
was
so
posted
angry."
on the channel west of Betrayal.
He stopped.
Please do not
He looked at his
repost
hands.
it in any form.
"And I have been so afraid That if I stopped being angry, I'd just be nothing. Just empty. Clara looked at him across the table. "You're not nothing," she said quietly. "You are the father of two extraordinary boys who found a letter in a storm and saved your ranch, and you don't even fully know yet what they are." She paused. "And you are a man who hired a stranger and didn't ask questions she couldn't answer, and gave her a room, and told her she didn't have to be anything other than what she was." Her voice had gone slightly unsteady. She steadied it. "That's not nothing, Jack. That's everything." He looked at her. For a long time he just looked at her, and she let him, because she understood that some things need to be seen properly before they can be spoken. Then he reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. Just that. His hand over hers, on the kitchen table, in the low lamplight. Not moving, not demanding anything, just there. Just present. She did not pull back. She turned her hand over slowly until her palm was against his, and her fingers closed. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the summer night breathed warm and still, and somewhere far out on the south pasture, past the repaired fence and the creek that still ran despite Harlan Briggs and despite everything, a night bird called once and went quiet. They sat like that for a long time, and when Clara finally went to her room and lay down on the narrow bed in the dark, she did not reach for the ribbon. For the first time in 14 months, she fell asleep before she needed to. The news that Jack Matthews had evidence to challenge Briggs' land claim reached Redwood Valley before breakfast. Clara didn't know how. Towns had their own circulatory system. Information moved through them the way blood moves through a body, fast and without asking permission. By the time she walked into the dry goods store that Thursday morning with Pete at her side, she could feel the shift. The quality of the stares had changed. Less judgment, more curiosity. The particular recalibration of people who have been repeating a story and have just been told the story was wrong. Bert was behind the counter when she came in. He looked at her and nodded with a warmth that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "Morning, Mrs. Walker." "Morning, Bert." "Heard Jack found something on the Briggs claim." "He did," she said. She didn't elaborate. She set her list on the counter. "Good," Bert said, simply and completely. He started pulling items. "That man's been a plague on this valley for 2 years. Time somebody stood up to him." Behind her, she heard the door open. She heard the specific silence that followed. The kind of silence that has a shape. And she turned. Hattie Drummond stood in the doorway. For the first time since Clara had arrived in Redwood Valley, Hattie did not have the posture of a woman leading a charge.
This
She looked
story was
smaller
posted
somehow.
on the channel west of
Her
Betrayal.
eyes moved from Clara
Please
to
do not
Bert
repost it
and
in
back
any
to
form.
Clara, with a careful calculation of someone revising a position they'd held very publicly. Clara looked at her directly, not with coldness, not with triumph, just steadily, the way you look at someone you are prepared to be decent to if they'll let you. Hattie opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, stiffly but clearly, "I hope Mr. Matthews gets a fair hearing from the judge." "So do we," Clara said. "Thank you, Hattie." Hattie gave a short nod and moved to the fabric bolts without another word. Clara turned back to the counter. Bert was looking at the ceiling with an expression of elaborate neutrality. "Don't," Clara said quietly. "Wasn't going to say a word," Bert said, and handed her the flower. The hearing was set for the second week of August. The 3 weeks between were the strangest of Clara's time at the Double M. Strange because they were, in certain stretches, almost peaceful. Briggs had gone quiet after Jack filed the counterclaim. His lawyer had requested more time. The circuit judge had denied it. The process was moving forward, and Briggs, who had spent years building a fraudulent claim on the assumption that no one would look closely enough, was now faced with the reality of someone who was looking very closely indeed. The ranch breathed. That was the only word for it, as if the property itself understood that the worst might be passing. Jesse and Clara had reached, somewhere between the storm and the legal papers, a state of genuine alliance. He helped her in the kitchen without being asked, badly, enthusiastically, and with a running commentary that made actual efficiency impossible. But she didn't tell him that. He had started saving her a particular spot at the breakfast table, the chair that faced the window, because he'd noticed once that she looked out toward the creek in the mornings, and he had decided, in the way children decide things, that she should be able to do that comfortably. Samuel had taken to sitting beside her in the evenings when Jack went over the account books. He brought a piece of wood he was trying to carve, badly, with the absolute confidence of a boy who has not yet understood what skill is, and worked on it in focused silence while she sewed, and the lamp burned low, and the summer night sat warm against the windows. These were the moments Clara had not planned for. These were the moments that were quietly, completely undoing her. One evening, Samuel held up his carving.
It was supposed to be a horse.
It looked somewhat like a horse, if you approached it with significant goodwill and a flexible definition of the word. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's wonderful," she said. He looked at it. "It doesn't really look like a horse." "Not yet," she said, "but the intention is there. Intention is where everything starts." He turned it in his hands. Then he looked at her with those serious eyes. "Clara, do you think Mama would have liked you?" The question hit her somewhere soft and unguarded, and she needed a full breath before she could answer. "I hope so," she said honestly. "I think she was someone who paid attention to the right things. And I think if she paid attention to me, she'd see that She stopped, started again. "I'd hope she could see that I loved this family, and that I'm not trying to replace anything. I'm just trying to be here." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with the certainty of a child who has made up his mind about something fundamental, "I think she would have liked you. I think she'd be glad you're here." Clara pressed her lips together. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. Samuel went back to his carving. Clara went back to her sewing. The lamp burned. The night breathed. Jack, she realized, had stopped in the hallway. She could feel him there without looking, could feel the quality of his stillness, the way he listened, the way he chose not to interrupt, the way he eventually moved quietly back to the table with the account books and said nothing at all. But later, when the boys were in bed and she was banking the kitchen fire, he said, from the table, without looking up from the ledger, "He's right, you know." She looked at him. "Eleanor." He turned a page. "She would have liked you. She had a gift for knowing who was real and who wasn't." He paused. "She would have known you were real." Clara stood at the fireplace with the poker in her hand and felt something in her chest expand to a size she hadn't known was possible. "Thank you," she said. "Just that." He nodded once. He closed the ledger. He went to bed. She stood there in the warm kitchen for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just being. The twist came 8 days before the hearing, and it came from Briggs in a way that was uglier than anything that had come before. Clara found out from Pete, who heard it from a hand at the neighboring spread, who had been in the saloon when Briggs' man let it slip. Whether by accident or design, she never knew. What Briggs had apparently decided, having lost the legal high ground, was to shift the battlefield entirely. He wasn't going after the land anymore. He was going after the boys. He had found Eleanor's sister in Missouri, a woman named Agnes Whitfield, and he had written to her. He had told her that Jack was in financial and legal jeopardy, that the ranch was failing, that the children were living in an unstable household with a woman of uncertain character, and that a court might look favorably on a petition for custody from a blood relative. Agnes Whitfield had written back. Her letter, according to Briggs' man who had talked too freely with a glass in his hand, was already with a lawyer in Denver. Clara sat in the kitchen when Pete told her this, and felt the bottom of the morning drop away. "When?" she said. "Don't know exactly. Soon." Pete's face was grim. "Jack needs to know." "I'll tell him." She walked out to the fence line. Jack was there with Cody, working, the way he always worked, with his whole body, giving everything he had to the physical task, because that was how he managed the things he couldn't control. He saw her face when she was still 20 yards away and dropped the wire. "What happened?" She told him. She watched his face go through the same sequence she had watched 4 weeks ago. Stillness, comprehension, contained fury. But this time, there was something underneath it that was different, more desperate, more raw. "Agnes," he said. The word sounded like it had thorns in it. "I told her. When Eleanor died, I told her the boys were staying with me and I was not negotiating it. She accepted that. I thought she accepted that." "Briggs changed her mind," Clara said. "Or her lawyer did. It doesn't matter which." She looked at him steadily. "You need to talk to her, Jack. Before this goes any further, you need to go to her directly." "Missouri's 4 days' ride." "Then you'd better leave soon." He stared at her. "I can't leave the ranch. The hearing's in 8 days. Briggs could make a move." "Pete and Cody are here. The hearing is handled. Your lawyer knows what to do." She kept her voice even and clear. "But Agnes Whitfield needs to hear from you, not from Briggs' version of you. She needs to see what this place is, what your boys are." She paused. "Bring her here, Jack. Invite her. Take away Briggs' weapon by making it not a weapon anymore." He looked at her for a long time. "And if she still wants to fight for custody," he said, "then you fight from a position of honesty instead of distance. But I don't think she will." She held his gaze. "She loved Eleanor. She wants those boys to be all right. That's all she really wants. Give her proof that they are." He turned away. He put both hands on the top fence rail and stood there, looking out at the south pasture, at the creek he couldn't see but could hear. She could see him thinking, working through it, the way he worked through everything, slowly and completely, committing when he decided. "Will you be all right here?" he said. "With the boys? If I go?" "Jack," she said it with gentle exasperation. "I have been managing this household and your sons and 2 ranch hands and
This
a
story
town
was
full of
posted
opinions
on the channel
for 5
west
weeks.
of Betrayal.
I will
Please
be
do not
fine."
repost it in any form.
Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Almost. "Yeah," he said. "You will." He left the next morning before dawn. Clara stood on the porch in the summer dark and watched the light from his lantern shrink down the road until it disappeared. Jesse stood beside her in his nightshirt, sleep-rumpled and serious. "He's coming back," Jesse said. It wasn't quite a question. "He's coming back," she said. Jesse looked up at her. "How do you know?" She put her hand on top of his head, feeling the warmth of him, the reality of him. "Because everything he loves is here," she said. Jesse thought about this with great solemnity. Then he said, "That includes you." Clara looked down at him. Jesse looked back with the absolute directness of a child who has stated a fact and sees no reason to apologize for it. She didn't answer, but she pulled him gently back inside, because the morning was coming, and there was breakfast to make, and a ranch to run. And some truths didn't need to be answered, only received. Jack came back on the 5th day. He was not alone. Clara heard the wagon before she saw it. She came out onto the porch and watched it come up the road. Jack on the seat, and beside him a woman she had never seen. Late 40s, dark-haired. Eleanor's eyes in a different face. Upright posture, hands folded. Expression carefully composed in the way of a person who has been crying and has finished, and does not plan to do it again where anyone can see. Agnes Whitfield stepped down from the wagon before Jack had fully stopped it. She looked at the house. She looked at the yard. She looked at the repaired fence line and the garden that Clara had spent 2 weeks slowly bringing back from its wild state, and the laundry on the line, and the 2 small boys who had appeared at the porch railing and were looking at her with wide, identical eyes. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Then Samuel said, "Are you our Aunt Agnes?" She made a sound, a broken, helpless sound. She crossed the yard in 6 steps and went down to his level and opened her arms, and both boys went into them with the unself-conscious completeness that children bring to everything. Clara stood on the porch and looked at Jack over Agnes Whitfield's head. He looked back at her. He was tired. 4 days of hard riding in the summer heat. He had dust on everything and shadows under his eyes. He looked like a man who has done something hard and is not entirely sure yet how it came out. She gave him a small nod. He exhaled. Agnes stayed 2 days. Clara gave her the spare room, not the room with Eleanor's boxes, but the other one, the properly spare one, and made her meals, and left her alone when she needed to be alone, and answered her questions directly when she had them. Agnes had several. She asked them carefully, the way a woman asks things when she's trying to be fair about a situation she came in prepared to distrust. On the second morning, they sat at the kitchen table over coffee while the boys and Jack were out in the paddock, and Agnes folded her hands and said, "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Walker." "You don't," Clara said. "I do. I was told things. I acted on them without coming to see for myself." Agnes looked at her coffee. "Eleanor was my whole family. When she died, I needed to hold on to something of her. The boys are the most Eleanor thing in the world." She paused. "Briggs told me they were being neglected. He told me the ranch was failing, and that their father was too lost in his grief to see it. I believed him because I was afraid." She looked up. "This is not a neglected house, Mrs. Walker. Those are not lost boys." "No," Clara agreed. "They're not." "Jesse showed me his shoe collection yesterday," Agnes said. "He has 11 boots that don't match anything. He's arranged them by size and assigned them all names." Clara kept her expression composed with effort. "He has mentioned the boots. Samuel spent 40 minutes explaining to me why his wooden carving is a horse and not a dog." Agnes's voice had gone soft. "He sounds exactly like Eleanor when he's explaining something. That same patience. That certainty." She pressed her lips together. "They're going to be fine." "They are," Clara said. "They're extraordinary boys." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. "And you? What are you to them?" The question was not hostile. It was genuine. It was a woman who had loved Eleanor asking, directly and honestly, what kind of shape this family had taken. Clara thought about 14 months and a blue ribbon and a narrow bed and a horse that finally ate from her hand. She thought about Jesse's grip on her coat and Samuel's voice and Jack's hand over hers on the kitchen table. "I'm not their mother," she said carefully. "I'm not trying to be. Eleanor is their mother, and she always will be." She paused. "But I love them, and I'm here, and I'm not leaving." She looked at Agnes steadily. "Whatever else comes next, that part is true." Agnes studied her. Then she nodded, slow and certain, and picked up her coffee cup. "Eleanor would have chosen you herself," she said quietly, "if she could have chosen someone." She took a drink, set the cup down. "I want to visit, twice a year if you'll have me. I want to know them as they grow." "Your family," Clara said simply. "You don't need permission." Agnes Whitfield left that afternoon. She embraced both boys for a long time. She shook Jack's hand and then changed her mind and embraced him too, briefly, fiercely, in the way of two people who have been on opposite sides of a grief and have just at last found each other on the same one. She looked at Clara last. She took both of Clara's hands in hers. She squeezed them once. She climbed into the hired wagon without another word. They watched her go. The hearing was 6 days later. Clara did not go. She stayed at the ranch with the boys and let the men handle what the men needed to handle. Because some battles are won before they reach the courtroom. And this one had been won in a lawyer's office in Harlan, the moment Eleanor's letter landed on the judge's desk. She knew it was over when Jack rode home at 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours earlier than expected, and came straight to where she was in the garden and stopped. She stood up. She looked at his face. "It's done," he said. She exhaled everything she'd been holding. "The deed was fraudulent," he said. "The judge ruled within an hour. Briggs is facing charges for filing a false claim." His voice was level, but underneath it was something enormous, something that had been coiled tight for months and was only now beginning to release. "The ranch is ours. The creek is ours. All of it." "Good," she said. Her voice wasn't entirely steady. "Clara." He said her name with that particular weight it had developed somewhere in the last 6 weeks. That weight that made it sound like more than a name. He took a step toward her. "I need to say something." She waited. He was not a man who found words easily. She had learned this about him. He lived in action, in the physical, in the work of his hands. Words cost him in a way they cost some people, and she had come to respect that cost. "When Eleanor died," he said, "I decided I was done. Not with living, just with the rest of it. The part that requires you to let people in." He paused. It seemed like the sensible thing. If you don't let anybody in, nobody can leave. "I understand that," she said quietly. "I know you do." He took another step. "I know because you were doing the same thing when you got off that coach. You were here to disappear, Clara. I could see it from the first day. You were doing everything right and feeling nothing and trying to be invisible." He paused. "And then the storm happened, and I stood in that doorway and saw you on that shed floor with my boys in your arms, and I understood that you were not invisible. Not even a little." Her eyes were burning. She did not look away.
This story was
"I don't
posted
have
on the
pretty
channel
words for
west
this,"
of Betrayal.
he said.
Please do
"I
not
don't have any
repost
words
it
that
in
are good
any
enough
form.
for what you've done for this family, for what you are to those boys." He stopped. Then, raw and direct in the way of a man who has decided to stop protecting himself. "What you are to me." She looked at him. He reached into his coat pocket and held something out. Small, simple. A ring. Plain silver, unpretentious. The kind of ring a rancher buys because it is real and will last, and doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "Eleanor had her own. This one's been in a box since before I can remember." He met her eyes. "I don't want to put you in anyone's place. I don't want you to be anyone but who you are. I just—" He stopped, breathed. "I want you to stay. Not because the boys need you, though they do. Because I need you. And I am not a man who says that." Clara looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at the full weight of what was being offered. Not romance, not a fairy tale, but something heavier and realer and more valuable than either of those things. A man who had rebuilt himself from the ground up, asking her to do the same. A family that had already, without anyone planning it, become hers. She thought about the ribbon. It was in her pocket. It was always in her pocket. But it no longer felt like a wound she was keeping open. It felt like what it was, something she had loved and lost, that lived in her heart now as something finished and true and honored. May had been loved. May would always have been loved. That didn't close when Clara opened to something new. The heart, she had learned, did not work by subtraction. She took the ring from his palm. Jesse's voice came from the porch behind them. "Is she saying yes?" Clara turned her head. Both boys were on the porch railing, leaning out with identical expressions of suspended intensity. Jesse had apparently been standing there long enough to have formed opinions about the outcome. "Jesse," Jack said, without looking away from Clara, "get down from that railing." "But is she—" "Jesse!" Samuel pulled his brother back from the railing. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "I think she's going to say yes. She's holding the ring." Clara laughed. She hadn't expected to, and it came out warm and completely real, and Jack made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else, and she slid the ring onto her finger and looked at it, and then looked at him. "Yes," she said. Jesse let out a sound of pure triumph from the porch that sent 3 birds off the fence line. Samuel said, quietly and seriously, "I knew it," with the tone of a boy whose faith in the order of things had been confirmed. Jack reached up and put his hand against her face. His thumb moved once across her cheekbone, gentle, certain, the gesture of a man who has decided to stop being careful about what he wants. "Clara Walker," he said. Just her name, said the way a man says the name of the thing he has decided to keep. "Jack Matthews," she said back. He kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not a grand gesture. It was quiet and certain and real, the way everything true between them had been. Built in increments, earned in small moments, worth more for having cost something. Jesse made a loud and theatrical sound of disgust from the porch. Samuel elbowed him. They pulled apart, and Clara looked over Jack's shoulder at the 2 boys on the porch. Jesse with his arms crossed in performative objection, Samuel with the quiet, settled expression of someone who has watched something come right and is at peace with it. And she felt it move through her from the ground up. Not like lightning, not like a wave, like something putting down roots, slow and permanent and meant to last. She had come to Redwood Valley to disappear. She had come with 1 bag and a dead child's ribbon, and the grief she'd been feeding for 14 months, because grief was the only honest thing she had left. She had come to be nothing, to be useful and invisible and empty of wanting. Instead, she had walked into a house full of broken things and begun, without quite deciding to, the long work of holding them together. The boys who needed someone to stay, the man who needed someone to see him, the ranch that needed someone to fight for it. And somewhere in the doing of all of it, in the daily, unremarkable work of showing up, she had found the thing she had not known she was looking for. Not a replacement, not a second chance. Something entirely its own. Something that had her name on it and had been waiting, patient and specific, at the end of a road she'd taken in desperation. She reached into her pocket. She took the ribbon out. She looked at it in her palm. The faded blue, the edge that had cut her so many times. Then she walked to the porch railing and held it over the flower bed Eleanor had planted. The one Clara had spent 2 weeks coaxing back to life. That was blooming now in the late summer heat with a stubbornness that felt personal. She let the ribbon go. It settled among the flowers, small and blue, and finally at rest. Jessie stared at it. "What was that?" "Something I was carrying," she said, "that I don't need to carry anymore." Samuel looked at the ribbon and the flowers for a moment. Then he looked at Clara with those deep, knowing eyes. He reached up and took her hand, not asking, just taking it, the way he'd taken it in the storm shed, certain and calm and completely sure. Jack stepped up beside her. He put his hand at her back. Just his hand, steady and warm and present. The 4 of them stood on the porch of the Double M Ranch in the last of the summer afternoon, and the creek ran on the south boundary, and the horses moved in the paddock, and the garden Eleanor had planted bloomed in the heat, and somewhere in the flowers a small blue ribbon lay at peace among the living things. She had come to Redwood Valley to disappear. She had become, instead, exactly what this family needed, and they had become, without her ever planning it, exactly what she needed too. And that, all of it, every piece, every hard-won inch of it, was home.